Today I'll use body filler, bondo, mud, or whatever you want to call it to repair this dent in this quarter panel. I'll share with you how to mix, apply, shape, and block your filler and give you all the tips, tricks, and techniques I use to get a perfect OEM shape in your repair or restoration project. Remember, it's not a dirty word, it's just bondo. I'll walk you through quickly how we got this dent prepared and ready for filler. Now this dent is about 18 inches. We've got a crease right down the center, and we also have a body line that's been damaged. So we need to get that dent out. We need to knock down the high areas around the dent. So we'll tap down the crowns as we pull out the center of that dent. Once I have the majority of the dent pulled out with the glue tabs, we'll go ahead and grind it down to bare metal. Now we're going to use the G90E to pull out the remaining dents. Now it's important not to over pull at this point. You want to leave a little bit of room so you can use that filler properly to block that panel straight. The dent has been removed and we're now ready for some filler. So we need to prepare the surface. We're going to apply the filler to with some 80 grit sandpaper. We want a good 80 grit scratch in those painted surfaces and over the metal so we have proper adhesion. Now I like to apply it over the edge of the paint surface, so we're going to feather out this edge with the 80 grit sandpaper and then apply our filler over it. Always check your technical data sheet to find out if the filler you're using can be applied over paint. Before we apply our filler, we want to clean the surface, so I'm using some spray away glass cleaner just to remove that dust residue. You can also use isopropyl alcohol or wax and grease remover. Today we're using upol lightweight gold. It's a reasonably priced filler that cuts really well. We mix our filler 50-1 or 2% hardener. Now you always want to knead your hardener tube and mix that up before you apply it to your filler. Upol claims that their filler won't separate when sitting in the can, so I was curious to see if that was true. Sure enough, I had no separation in the can when I opened it up. Now I'm going to go ahead and stir it up anyway, and I'll apply a little bit to my palette. I'm not going to need a ton of filler. We're going to do a thin coat, fill those low areas, and then we'll go over it with a second coat. Always mix up your hardener, knead it in, and make sure it's all mixed up in there before you apply it. If a clear liquid comes out, you know that's not properly mixed up, because after they sit, they will separate. I apply my hardener from the center to the outside edge of my puddle, and in normal temperatures, that's going to be the right amount of hardener for your filler. If it's a hotter day, you're going to want to use a little bit less hardener. If it's a cooler day, you might want to use a little bit more. When mixing, you don't want to introduce any extra air into your filler, so avoid stirring it. You want to fold it in until it's all one uniform color and you have no streaks. If you stir it or introduce air, you're going to cause pinholes when you spread it on your panel and start block sanding it, and then you're going to have to correct those. After mixing, if you press out the filler flat on your panel, that's going to help eliminate those air pockets as well. It's also going to dissipate the heat, so you're going to have a little bit more time to work with this filler before it kicks. Get a small amount on your spreader and press it into the metal. This will promote adhesion. You don't need to put it on all at once. We're going to put several coats on while this is wet, and we'll add filler with each additional coat. I'll spread it on the top section first down to that body line, and then we'll come back to the bottom section and we'll start forming that body line out of filler. Now we can start adding some more filler. We can decrease the pressure on our spreader and allow that filler to fill all those low areas, so then when we go to block it out, we'll have a nice straight panel. Okay, so now we're going to do the first sanding on this. I'm going to put a little guide coat on here just to show you how it blocks out. Today I'm going to be using this 3M Cubitron xtract sandpaper. It's supposed to be really good sandpaper. It's supposed to last a long time and really cut well. Cost effective too, because even though it's a little bit more expensive, it's going to last a heck of a lot longer. I like to shape with 80 grit. You could shape with 36 grit. It's a coarser paper. It's going to cut it quicker, but it leaves very deep scratches that you have to remove. So my progression is 80 grit, 180, 320, 600. Here I'm using a flexible long block because this quarter panel has these contours, and we want this block to lay flat against that panel in order to get it straight. It's best to use the longest block possible that you can lay flat against the surface. Now if you don't have a long block, you could use a small block, but you just have to work your way across the panel doing sections at a time. But it's always best to use a long block if possible. And I have links to all the tools and products I use down in the description. The technique to block is a crosshatch or X pattern. You want to go in all different directions. So the important thing is you don't want to just block in one direction. Block in different directions. You want to level this filler out. That is the whole goal in order to get this panel straight. I'll block the lower section of this quarter panel first, blocking up to that body line, and then we'll work the top section and we'll block down to it. As I'm blocking this, I can see we have a little bit of a low area where that guide coat is at the front of this quarter panel. We'll have to address that. And I'm starting to break through into some bare metal. So what I want to do now is to stop on this lower section and we'll start working the top section. Once you hit bare metal, you're no longer blocking that filler straight. You need to address that metal. You either need to tap it down and add some more filler in that area or add filler over the entire repair area and block that once again. These high areas were very minor, so I was able to tap those down with the flat round section of my body hammer. You could also use a paint stick or a shrinking slapper with your body hammer to knock down those high areas. Now I went ahead and cleaned this panel with some isopropyl alcohol, and then I masked off that body line, and we're going to lay another coat of body filler over this lower section. Once we applied the filler, we'll go ahead and pull the tape, and then we'll block over this with 80 grit sandpaper. We want to smooth this out with the 80 grit, and then I'll go over it with 180 grit to refine those 80 grit scratches. I'll apply some guide coat, and then we'll work from the front to the rear of this quarter panel, straightening it out as we go. And if you're using a small block, this is the technique you want to use. You want to do it in sections. Make sure you're going blocking in all different directions to get that nice and flat. Now off camera, I went ahead and blocked this entire repair area with 180 grit sandpaper. Now we're ready to clean this. So I'm going to wash this with some isopropyl alcohol. We just have a few minor imperfections and a few little waves, but we're going to correct all that with some glazing putty. I'll go ahead and retape this body line quickly, and then we'll lay our glazing putty right up to that line, pull the tape, and that'll help give us a guide to shape that body line. This is the product I'll be using today. This is USC Icing. This is a polyester glazing putty is what it is. It'll fill any imperfections. It'll also fill scratches. So if we have some 80 grit scratches that we might have missed, this is a good insurance putty to get those filled and not primer over those. We have a few little waves that we're going to block out using this glazing putty. We won't need a whole lot to do this entire quarter panel. This is going to be a very thin coat to fill some minor scratches and a few little waves. So we poured a little bit on our palette. We'll add our hardener. We'll fold it in until it's all one uniform color, and then we'll apply it to the panel. When you're applying this glazing putty, you want to press it in firm. You want it to be as smooth as possible because remember, we're almost done with this repair, and the less blocking we have to do at this point, the better. This is a very thin coat and it blocks very easy. So 180 grit sandpaper is what you sand this with. Then we'll block over it with 320 to get it prepared for primer. I'll go ahead and pull the tape, and then we'll apply our icing to the bottom half of this repair. I hope you're finding this video helpful. If you are, or if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments below. So the icing came out nice and smooth. We have a little ridge right on the byline. That's okay. We're going to block up to that and block down to it, and we'll shape that right at the end just before we primer it. I'll add a little guide coat to make sure we're getting this sanded smooth, and we'll get our 80 grit sandpaper along with our flexible block and block this in an X pattern until we got it perfectly smooth. After the icing starts to smooth out, I switch over to 320 grit sandpaper and finish my blocking with 320 to remove those 180 grit scratches and get it ready for primer. Now I am using the 3M Cubitron 2 xtract sandpaper, and I love that sandpaper. It works great, cuts beautifully. So now I'm just fitting up the rear bumper. I noticed that the body line is not quite where I want it to be, so I need to make some adjustments there. I'm going to do a little bit of blocking and shaping of that body line and blend it in basically to the rest of the quarter panel. Now we are painting this rear bumper, so we're not worried about 320 grit scratches on that bumper. This is going to be sanded down and painted. Now we've got this body line matching up perfectly, so it's time to prime. The primer we're using today is the upol System 20 2253. It is a high build primer that mixes up 4:1:1 for the primer surfacer, which is what we're going to be using today. We don't want a really thick high build primer because this panel is perfectly straight. So we'll find our mixing ratio on the bottom of our disposable cup system. This is the Savito disposable cup system. It's a budget friendly disposable cup, and we'll mix it up to that ratio. We'll add our 4 parts primer, our 1 part activator, the 2323, and 1 part of urethane reducer. We'll mix it up. We'll add our lid. Now you want to make sure this is sealed. I always like to lift it up, make sure it's nice and sealed. It's not going to leak. We'll add our collar and we're ready to spray our primer. So I went ahead and masked this off. The gun I'll be using today is the Eastwood LT100. This is a low CFM gun. Sprays really well, does a really good job with paint, sealer, clear coat. We're going to go ahead and set our air pressure at about 15 PSI. We'll have our fan pattern wide open, and we'll have our volume turned 3 turns out from closed. I'll apply 1 coat. We'll let it flash off for 15 minutes, and then we'll apply a 2nd coat of this 2K urethane primer. Now we're ready for the 2nd coat, and I'm going to use this little Gunbudd. This is a light for your spray gun. Oh yeah, this is key if you're working in a home garage, you have poor lighting. Get yourself one of these Gunbudds or something similar. This works great in this environment. You're not in a paint booth, you don't have a ton of lighting, but if you add one of these, now you can see what you're doing, especially if you're doing blends. When I'm in a dark area and I'm trying to primer, these come in really handy. Listen, if you want to learn how to prep out and prepare your primer for paint, check out one of these videos now, and be sure to check out next week's video when we finish up this repair. I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time on Garage Noise.